Welcome back to the Sooner Pocket Podcast. Sam and Chris here before the final game of OU's regular season. Sooners going to be hosting the TCU Horned Frogs in what will be billed as a revenge match from last year. TCU obviously put the whooping on us last year, took out our starting quarterback ahead of Texas. So, be an interesting game. Lots of good story points. Chris, what are you looking at most as we come into this week?
There are a few things I'm looking at coming into this week. The first thing is I'm looking to see which OU team shows up. There have been two OUs this year. There has been the team that walks all over people, and then there's the team that gets walked over. Pretty much the one exception to that was the Texas game. It was kind of a mix of both, but like look at the Arkansas State, the Tulsa, Iowa State, and West Virginia games. Those we were just walking all over people. Then you look at like Oklahoma State, Kansas, UCF, BYU, heck, you could even argue Cincinnati. We were getting walked all over. It was just, we're either dominating or we're fighting for our lives. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground of like a good 38-20 win or anything like that. It's either 63-4 or it's 31-30. There's no middle ground, and that makes me nervous. So I'm interested to see which team shows up. Also, I'm looking to see which quarterback shows up. Brent Venables said in the press conference yesterday that Dillon Gabriel's on a good path, and some of the beat writers are reporting that if he continues to progress at the rate he is, he should have no problem playing on Friday. I mean, despite that, it still has us all nervous. We all want to see Jackson Arnold do well, but we also don't know how he's going to do in 4 quarters of football. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. What about yourself?
Well, I like the point you bring up about not knowing quite what to expect out of OU. I will say, to OU's credit, in all but one home game this year, they've pretty well run the game. Arkansas State hosting them 73-0. SMU winning 28-11, winning by a couple possessions there. Iowa State 50-20. West Virginia 59-20. Had the UCF game obviously by 2, but for the most part, it's been a story of home OU versus OU on the road, as far as whether we really dominate a game, especially through conference play. So that will be a storyline for sure. And Jackson Arnold, I think he will be okay in 4 quarters of football. I think what you lose out on there a little bit, especially being toward the end of the season here and facing a TCU team that's playing a little better than it did at the beginning of the year, you lose a lot of the leadership that Dillon Gabriel brings, and just a lot of the mental processing, the mental aspect of it that I think you get from a quarterback of his experience. So I'll be hoping that Dillon Gabriel gets to go out on a high note, playing this one against the Horned Frogs, get his pound of flesh. But we'll see here. We'll see how it happens. Tell me if you've heard this. In New York, flight takes off. It's a cargo flight bound for Belgium, and the pilot comes on talking to air traffic control, says, "Hey, we got to turn back to JFK. I've got a horse on the loose." There was a horse stall on board this cargo plane. Horse breaks loose, and it gets in the plane. They had to land the plane, find the horse in there, and get it back into its stall, get it tied up.
I heard about this.
No, it's an odd little bit of news. And I'll tell you, horses were loose all over the field in Provo, Utah this week. Against the Cougars of BYU. Brent Venables yesterday in his press conference saying that he was actually relieved when he watched the film of the game, saying basically, we didn't really get whooped. It wasn't like we were totally manhandled. It was more just that we weren't gap sound. The guys were out of position. It was
just one guy doing it.
Guys were out of position a little bit, and just left something to be desired there. So coming into this week, I'm really just looking for some fundamental success in the front seven. Want to see our linebackers, our D linemen hitting the right gaps. I know pressure has been an issue for us this year. Venables hinted at that a little bit too, saying, it's largely because of the blocking schemes that have been thrown at us and the speed with which opposing quarterbacks are working us, but should be good. When we look at the conference stats, TCU and Oklahoma both right up there in total offense and in passing yards per game. Rushing is where it dips off a little bit. Rushing, Oklahoma is the 6th rushing offense in the Big 12, and TCU is down at 10th. I will say, to TCU's credit their ranking isn't necessarily an indicator of how well they're going to do rushing the ball. BYU improved their average by about 12 yards, their season per game average by about 12 yards against us. So it can work. But what was the best part of Saturday for you?
The pick six, without a doubt. Pick six.
No doubt, man. The pick six.
That was something, I tell you. I loved watching Billy Bowman go. I was doing some numbers earlier, and I realized something. Coming into the Baylor game last year on November 5th, Billy Bowman had 0 career interceptions. That was his sophomore season, 0 career interceptions towards the latter half of the year. And again, that Baylor game was on November 5th of last year. We ended up losing, I think it was 38-35. But he intercepted a pass in that game, and it was a really nice interception. Jumped in front of the receiver, dove after the ball. It was a nice interception. Since that game, including that game, he has 8 interceptions. He has 8 interceptions, 2 of which have gone for 6. And the 2 pick sixes, there was nothing easy about either one of them. First one was against Iowa State this year, where he had to work his way from one sideline all the way to the other before he eventually found his way to the end zone. And then in the BYU game, it's hard to sprint for 100 yards. It is really hard. And especially considering they were going up against a running quarterback, that Retzloff dude from BYU. He is a fast dude. He almost caught Billy Bowman.
Yeah,
and you could tell Bowman
too.
He was exhausted at the end of the run, but he made it. He's become a true ball hawk. 3 interceptions last season, 5 so far this season. He was one of my favorite things to watch, and that pick six, that was just the icing on the cake. But there are a few things about our defense. There are people out there who will try and tell you that OU doesn't have a really good defense this year, that it's just kind of slightly better than last year. And that's just not true. And you want to know why? Here's why.
Yes, I want to know why.
Last season, OU in the fourth quarter across all 13 games, Brent Venables said at the beginning of the season that the fourth quarter was statistically our worst quarter. The fourth quarter last year, we allowed 99 total points. That's 7.62 points per fourth quarter. Flash forward to this year, through 11 games, instead of 99 fourth quarter points, we've allowed 46 fourth quarter points, which is 4.18 points per fourth quarter. And don't forget, there were a few fourth quarter shutouts in there. There are like 2 games where we allowed a total of 22 fourth quarter points. So take out those, and across 9 games, we've only allowed 20-something first quarter points, 24 fourth quarter points. So on top of that, of the 4 top offenses in the Big 12, we're one of them. We've played 2 of them, and we're about to play the third. So number 1 offense in the Big 12, we played UCF, held them to 29 points. Number 4 offense in the Big 12, Texas, held them to 30 points. And we're about to play TCU. If we can hold them to 30 or fewer points, that would just say so much about our defense. Because there were, 5 games last year, maybe 6, where we allowed 40 or more points. And there was one where we allowed more than 50 points, the game against TCU. We haven't even, the closest a team has come to 40 points this year was Kansas at 38. The next closest, Texas, at 30. So I'm really excited about how our defense has done this year, and I'm feeling really good about how they're going to do this weekend against TCU. One other thing, real quick, about the BYU game and our defense.
Yeah.
Brent Venables yesterday in his press conference mentioned that it was just one guy tearing up the defense. And if you look at that statistically, it fits. Jake Retzloff, LJ Martin, and Deion Smith for BYU had a combined 16 carries for 35 yards, barely over 2 yards a carry. Then you get Aiden Robbins, who had 22 carries for 182 yards. That's something where they had a good scheme and one player was just having himself a day. But
Boy,
that's the
was.
worst rushing performance we've given up all year to a single player. So I'm feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something we need to adjust to. I think a little closer. I think it's good that we know, or a little quicker,
Absolutely.
I should say. It's good that we recognize that it's a fixable issue. Just wish it's one we were able to fix in the game a little sooner. What do we have on the slate this week? For games, we got Iowa and Nebraska, probably going to be another record low for points. Yeah, 26.5 point over under. Do we think Iowa can, the interesting thing about Iowa here, they're 5-1 in their last 6 games, and they've hit the under every time in those 6 games.
I don't know how. I don't know how you can have an offense that's so bad and win 5 out of those 6 games, especially with an over under so low, how you get the under. That's beyond me. And Nebraska, I do not have much faith in them to do anything against Iowa's defense.
Yeah. Did you see some of the OU star power last night shine out in the Broncos and Vikings game?
I did. Yeah.
Samaje Perine kind of leading the pack for Russ and the Broncos there at the end.
Yeah, he did a really good job. There have been a lot of OU players who have really done well in the league this year. Nick Benito, he's really come on. The last year he didn't really get to play too much, but this year he's really come on. He's getting after the quarterback. He hit Mahomes a few times, which not many people can say that. You've got Marvin Mims, who's one of the best special teams players in the league right now as a rookie, and he showed some spots of brilliance towards the beginning of the year receiving. Got Perine, who's doing so well. Turner Yell, he hasn't done too much, but he's a starter out there. Then you look at some of the other guys across the league. Trey Brown has just suddenly come out of nowhere with Seattle, and he's having a heck of a season. He got a game-winning pick 6 early in the year, I think in week 1. Yeah. There's let's see here. Who else? There's CeeDee Lamb, who's having the best year of his career, and it's not even close. We've just got all types of people all over the league doing some really good work.
Yeah, it's impressive to see. Back to OU and BYU, OU and TCU. TCU is obviously going to run the ball a lot. I think the run defense has got to be ready. Offense has got to be ready at home to give Dylan Gabriel and some of these other guys a proper send-off. I think OU pulls this one out tomorrow. Friday. Excuse me. Days are all mixed up this week. I think OU ends up pulling this one out 49-14.
I could see that happening, but don't forget, TCU's been pretty good lately. They haven't really been too bad. They just came off of a 42-17 blowout over Baylor. Granted, Baylor's not too good this year. They're just 3-8 now on the year, but beating Baylor 42-17, Dave Aranda's made it very difficult to score that many points on his defense the past few years. So good on him. Like I remember in 2020, Baylor won maybe 1 or 2 games, but there was only one game really where 1 or 2 games where they didn't lose by just 7 points. And one of those was against Oklahoma. But they're scoring a lot of points in their last 5 games, according to ESPN. 42 against Baylor, 26 against Texas, 28 against Texas Tech. They were held to just 3 against Kansas State, but they scored 44 against BYU. We only scored 31. So this isn't a bad offense that we're going up against.
Not at all.
I think TCU is going to get some points. And I think their defense is going to get the occasional nice stand, but I don't think they have the defense to really dominate Oklahoma, especially dominate our offensive line with how Gavin Sawchuk has come on lately. I'm going to predict a final score of 45-21.
Well, that's fair. It'll be interesting to see what Brent Venables inspires his team to do. And it's in their final Big 12 homestand.
Final Big 12 game ever, unless we make it to the Big 12 championship.
Yep. Which that, if I'm being honest with you, Chris, I don't see it happening.
We're going to need a miracle. It's as simple as that.
We had to go and lose to OSU and Kansas.
As annoyed as I am with the Big 12 for how they're doing their tiebreak rules this year, if we didn't want to be in this scenario, we wouldn't have lost to OSU and Kansas. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm always going to root against Texas, and I'm always going to root against Oklahoma State. We saw UCF absolutely obliterate Oklahoma State. Maybe they're on the phone with BYU right now, giving them some tips.
Who are you rooting for in an OSU Texas Big 12 title game?
Is a meteor an option?
I've seen some clever responses today. Meteors, power outages, cold showers.
You know, I hate to say it, but I'd be rooting for Oklahoma State. I don't like Oklahoma State, but I hate Texas. And I don't think there would be anything more insufferable than a Texas fan whose team is heading to the playoffs. I can't imagine going through that, especially if they were to win a game. We would never hear the end of it. OU could win 4 national championships in a row, and Texas fans would still be saying, we won a playoff game before you all. But one thing that might help us make a statement towards the Big 12 championship game this week in our own game, gain a win. Gentry Williams is back. Venables confirmed it yesterday in the press conference. Gentry Williams is back. The lockdown corner with how many? 3 interceptions on the year?
Well, shoot, I hope he's back.
He's been a serious difference maker for our defense this year, and Brent Venables said he's back, and I cannot wait. I can't wait. Now, quick question. When it comes to the players on our team right now who haven't gotten as much play time as we might have thought they would, like players like Javonte Barnes, who last year was our number 2 running back, this year is number 4. Heck, he's number 5. We've seen Dylan Smothers, and let's see, who's the other one that we've seen? Caleb. We haven't seen any Caleb Hicks except for the first game against Arkansas State, but Dalen Smothers, we've seen a lot of him this year. Before we've seen Javonte Barnes. You think Javonte Barnes is still a Sooner now that the portal's open? You think he's about to head out?
I think there's room for him if he wants to carve out a spot for himself.
I like that. I agree with that. Also, one last question. Let's say, hypothetically, OU plays USC in a bowl game this year. Do you think that Caleb Williams would stay to play against Oklahoma? Do you think Lincoln Riley would show up to the game, or would he be mysteriously sick that day? What do you think would happen?
Lincoln Riley's a narcissist. He's not going to not show up. He'll be there. Caleb Williams, no. I don't care who USC is playing. He's got nothing to gain playing in a bowl game at this point. I think no matter who they're playing, he's gone to the draft.
You know who his head coach was in his one and only bowl win?
Bob Stoops.
Bob Stoops in the Alamo Bowl, which, if I remember correctly, was our first podcast episode. Alamo Bowl preview.
Hey, I want to bring something up to you real quick. You mentioned Texas making the playoff. I'll be honest with you, Chris. I'm not seeing a Texas playoff.
Yep.
I'm not, because when I look at the teams ahead of them, Georgia, worst case, they lose to Alabama. Worst case for Georgia, they lose to Alabama, who's a top 10 CFP team, and they drop to maybe number 4. So in that scenario, you've got 2 SEC teams in there, Ohio State and Michigan. If you have an ultra tight game between those 2, and then whoever the winner of that is wins the Big Ten championship, I think you've got a case for a double SEC, double Big Ten playoff. But at the same time, Washington, you've got to factor in. Oregon, you're going to have to factor in if they're Pac-12 champs. And Florida State, I don't even know where Florida State loses anything the rest of this season or in the ACC title game. I don't see a path in there for Texas. And even if the dominoes in front of them fall right, I'm not convinced Alabama doesn't jump them.
Well, and here's one other thing to remember. Florida State lost Jordan Travis for the season, and he announced earlier that he is no longer his career as a Florida State Seminole is done because of that injury. He's not coming back next year.
Yeah, so, it won't matter. They'll be okay.
Well, even then, you gotta think the College Football Playoff Committee, their job is to determine who the 4 best teams are. Even if Florida State wins, I don't think they'd consider him one of the 4 best teams without Jordan Travis. And so in that scenario, the only way, so let's say hypothetically Alabama wins the SEC championship, which I'm hoping for. The only way Georgia doesn't stay in the playoff is if Alabama just beats the brakes off of Georgia. If it ends up being like 41-17, or like 49-20 or something like that, Georgia might not make it into the playoff. But if it ends up being something like 38-35, 28-24, something like that, we could I'd be shocked if we didn't see both Alabama and Georgia in the playoff, because you've got the 2-time defending national champion who hasn't lost a game since their conference championship game to Alabama 2 seasons ago. And you also have Alabama, who's a one-loss conference champion in the SEC. Let's face it, Alabama's win over Georgia would be seen as much better than Texas's win over Alabama. On top of that, you've got Oregon or Washington, whoever, as long as they don't drop a game this weekend, as long as one of them doesn't drop a game, as long as they both win this weekend, they're going into the Pac-12 championship, and whoever wins that game is going to be in the playoff. And then whoever wins Ohio State, Michigan, as long as they beat Iowa in the conference championship game, they're going to the playoff. So yeah, I think Alabama would jump them because they're significantly better than they were earlier in the year. They're just, I honestly don't see a path for Texas unless A, Alabama loses the conference championship game, and B, whoever wins the Pac-12 championship game drops a game this week. Washington has the Apple Cup against Washington State. Oregon plays Oregon State, and that's not going to be an easy game, but I think Oregon can handle Oregon State. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but Texas is going to need a lot of dominoes to fall to make it into the playoff.
They really need a blowout in the Ohio State Michigan game. They need one of those teams to fully separate in and out of the top 4. And they need the Pac-12 to have Washington or Oregon lose this week. If either Washington or Oregon loses, the Pac-12 will have no representation. I don't think they'd even put a one-loss Washington team in there over Florida State, over a one-loss Big Ten team, or even over a one-loss Texas or Alabama. I don't see any way the Pac-12 commands that kind of respect. And Florida State, I hear you on the Jordan Travis thing. I just think when you look at what Florida State has done this year on both sides of the ball, they've been a lot more than just Jordan Travis. And they're still one of the 4 best teams in the country, in my opinion.
We'll see
if they pull out the conference championship. So this has been the Sooner Pocket Podcast. Make sure to check out the blog here, this side of me, www.soonerpocket.com. Chris and I post some good content on there, some game previews, recaps, all the works. It's been a good season so far. We've knocked 11 of these out, 9-2, unquestionable improvement over last year. Really exciting to see. Hopefully we can make it 10-2 this weekend against the Horned Frogs. Chris, have a happy Thanksgiving. Boomer Sooner. Let's hope for a win over the Horned Frogs this week.
Happy Thanksgiving and Boomer Sooner.